Hi, folks. It's Charles Thomas. We're going to start in just a minute here. Give folks a chance to get logged in, get set. It's lunchtime for a lot of folks who are watching this, so feel free to enjoy your lunch while we go through this. I hope it's good. As you're getting in and gets up, we'll take about another 30 seconds, and then we're going to get started. Draw your attention to the question and answer box. I encourage you to use that as we go through here. Ten more seconds, then we're going to get started. Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome, and thank you for coming to this workshop today. My name is Charles Thomas, and I'm the founder of Intrepid Eagle Finance. Want to welcome you all for coming today. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. First off, you're going to get a recording today, so feel free to take notes, but if you happen to miss something, you are going to get a recording of this, so don't worry, you'll be able to go back, or if you want to share anything with your spouse, that's going to be an option for you. I do want to let you know that there's a Q&A box. And because I want to make this as valuable for you as I can, I'm going to have that Q&A box up here. I'm going to be watching that the whole time we're talking today. Please ask questions. I want this time to be relevant for you. I'm going to do my level best to answer as many of those as I can as we go to try to get you the most value out of this time that I can. We'll have some dedicated Q&A time at the end, but I'm going to be watching that as we go. So feel free to put in as many questions there as you want. Do my level best. And just one reminder, you'll get that recording. I'm also going to send you some resources. You're going to get that as well. So please check your email, check your spam. If you don't see it, you'll have something as I follow up to this. So we'll help set you up for putting some of the things we're going to talk about today into practice and into motion. Quick disclosure before we get started. What we're going to talk about today is educational in nature. Nothing is in specific investment, tax, accounting, or legal advice. For the full disclaimer, you're encouraged to go to intrepideaglefinance.com/disclaimer. And lastly, one favor for me, and honestly, a favor for you. Either mute your phone or put it into Do Not Disturb. I want you to get the full benefit of today, and you thought this was valuable enough to set aside in your schedule. So I want you to get that full benefit, put that off to the side, put it on Do Not Disturb so you can give this your full attention, and I'll do my best to make this valuable time for you. Now, I want to make sure you're in the right spot, because if you're not, I want you to do other things with your day, but I want to make sure you're in the right spot. This workshop is for you if you have a family, you have kids, and we're using a broad definition of kids here. But if you have kids, you want to learn about saving and investing specifically for your children. We know that's important for mom and dad and adults. That's great. That is not our focus for today. We're talking about the kids today. And you want to find effective ways to save for your children's benefit. If that's one of your goals, that you want to use this tool to be able to do that, then you're in the right place. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Do encourage you to stay till the end. I'm going to have something I want to share with you to help you get started putting some of these things into place. So stick with us until then. But first, I want to start off with a bit of scripture. I want to take us back to think about the parable of talents. I want to think about how that plays into what we're talking about today. So if you remember the parable of the talents, it's about a master who is leaving town, and he has gone to his 3 servants, and he has entrusted each of them with some money called a talent, which is essentially a gold coin. And each of them has gotten their own portion of talents, and they're going to be they've been asked to take care of that while the master is gone, and he's got to check back when he returns. And we get 3 different things that happen. So we take servant number 1, he gets 5 talents. When the master returned, he took that, he invested it with a banker. He managed to double that. He got 5 more talents, so he had 10. Went from the 5 to 10, he grew that. Master was pleased with this. Servant number 2, you received 2 talents. Did the same thing, took that, invested it, grew it, turned the 2 into 4. Master was pleased with this. Servant number 3, he took the 1 talent, and what did he do with it? That's right, he buried it in the ground. He did nothing with it. Master was displeased. And why was he displeased? Well, he had asked them to practice good stewardship. And stewardship is something that we practice for others, but we also practice for what we're blessed with ourselves. And that includes what we're blessed with for our children. Practicing stewardship is one of those concepts that applies very directly to what we're going to talk about today. You exercise stewardship for what you've been blessed with, but that extends to your family as well. That includes your kids and how you grow what you have been blessed with. Investing that when it comes to money is a way to do that. That's a way we think about that. So that servant who put that money in the ground, he didn't meet the full potential that he was charged with. He was able to do that. And this is a way to practice that stewardship, like those first 2 servants, to be able to do that. And it comes up in Proverbs too. When we think about Proverbs 31, she considers a field and buys it with the fruit of her hand. She plants a vineyard. And I love that because it talks about growing grapes in a vineyard. If you ever talk to somebody who has worked at a vineyard, they will tell you, you have to be very forward thinking to be able to do that because it's a long-term thing. You don't plant grapes and then have wine 6 months later. It's a very long-term thinking oriented pursuit. Same thing with what we're talking about here. But in the same fashion, there are fruits at the end that are a reward. A little bit about me. My name is Charles. I'm founder of Intrepid Eagle Finance. A couple things about me. I'm a homeschool dad, 3 kids, active in the community with folks. Professionally, I've got an MBA from the University of South Carolina. I'm a certified financial planner, and I founded Intrepid Eagle Finance, where we do financial planning for Christian families. Now, thinking about our topic for today, why is this even something you should be worrying about? For all the things you have when you have a family, whether you have 1 kid or 9 kids, you have all this other stuff to worry about. Why is this even something you should worry about for your kids? Well, it's important. When you think about investing for your kids, it's a way to access compound interest. When we think about compound interest, it's one of the most impactful things when we talk about our money. It's a way to earn interest on interest on interest on interest, and it just keeps going and going and going. And it's a way to benefit your kids. Another thing that is very powerful with this that we're going to talk about, it's a way to orient money around certain goals and priorities for your family. So if you have priorities for your kids, this is one way to orient dollars to specific goals and match those things up. And that can be very powerful. And another thing to think about is just planning for your children's future and long, fruitful lives. Things are going to come up along the way they're going to need. This is a way to provide for them for needs in the future. Some things you anticipate, in some cases, things you might not have even thought of yet. This is a way to be able to do that. Now, when we're investing for children, there are some similarities, but there's some very specific distinctions compared to us as adults. This is a place I see folks get tripped up a lot. There's some questions that you need to think about at the very beginning that will help set you up for success and be able to put you in a better spot with making these sorts of decisions. The first thing I want you to think about is, where is this money coming from? What is the source that it came from? Because it does make a difference. Now, what are some possible answers for that? Well, in a lot of cases, it's going to be a gift. That is important. Could be a gift from you as parents, could be a gift from family like grandparents and uncle. Well, it could be somebody at church you're close with. That makes a difference where that money's coming from to determine what your options are as far as where to put that and grow those dollars. That's important. Another option is inheritance. That could be from family members passed away, chosen to leave something to one of your kids directly. That's important to know. That does impact some of your choices here. Another option is earnings. So we think about those older children who might get a part-time job in high school. They might actually have earnings from a job. That's impactful. That also opens up some very specific options that we can look at and think about. We're going to revisit that. Then you could also have a combination of these things. You could have some money you're thinking about setting aside that came from a combination of different things. That's important to know what that source is, because it opens up or closes off, in some cases, some possibilities, but it's important to establish that and be aware of that upfront. The next question I want you to think about is just purpose. Now, we don't invest for a hobby. We know it's for a purpose, but it's important to think about, and I encourage folks to discuss this with your spouse. If we're going to set aside some money for our son or daughter, what's that money going to be used for? Now, a popular one that folks think about is education. So thinking about maybe that's college, private high school, trade school, community college, could be that's a popular one a lot of folks like to think about. Another one is, hey, maybe we want our son to be able to buy a car when they get out of high school. That's something we want them to look forward to, think about, be able to do that. Could be that or another major purchase. Maybe you want to be flexible. Maybe you want to retain an option and say, well, we want to put some money aside. We want our child to be able to make that decision when they get older, what they want to use money for. Maybe it's for college, maybe it's for something else. We want to retain options and keep flexibility. That's another thing. Could be retirement. Now, this one doesn't come up as often, but it's something to think about. Maybe we want to give our kids a head start on saving for retirement. That could be an option. You might have a situation where you have a child who has a chronic disability. That might be something that you want to set some money aside for, so they are cared for into adulthood. That could be an option. And then lastly, I just want to mention specific events are something that folks think about sometimes. Sometimes that's a wedding or something like that. So think about those. And this is just a handful of things this could be for, but think about what that purpose is and what that money would be used for. That can help you make a lot of other decisions and think about where something needs to be. Now, I want to give you two examples about where defining this purpose plays out and how it can help make some other decisions for you. So let's take this family first. They're a very college-focused household. They hold education is a very strong principle for this family. They believe very strongly their daughter is going to go to college. She is college bound, working toward that. They are certain that she's going to go to college somewhere. They just don't know exactly where yet. And when they put money aside, it's important to this family that it not be used for a car or a trip. They want to make sure this money is only used for college. They want to keep that control over that, make sure it's tied to a specific purpose. This family also wants to save year after year after year. That's something they're going to set aside a little bit of money each year and be able to do that. These are things that lead us down one specific path. Now, to contrast that with another family, this family values flexibility over other things. So they don't know if their son's going to go to college or what he's going to do, but they want to set some money aside. They also don't want to put any limitations on there. They want to leave it open so their son could use it for college. They could also use it for starting a business or something else. They don't want those limitations. And by contrast, they got a bonus at work. They want to put aside some money one time. These are important things to think about that will help define our path. Now, the last question I want you to think about is time. Time is very important when we're thinking about this. That helps determine what the most appropriate option are, particularly when things like investments are chosen. I'm going to give you an extreme example here. When we talk about the college question again. On the one end of the spectrum, let's say a family they just had a kid and they want to save for college. Well, that's 18 years that they have for money to be set aside and to grow. Contrast that with another family who has got some money they want to set aside, but they are actively filling out college applications. College starts in 8 months. That's a completely different situation. and defines our path much differently. So think about that time frame, and you may not have it down to the day, but think about what that looks like. Now, when you set aside money for kids, there are some distinctions between when we do this for you or I as adults, or for kids specifically. And there's a couple of things you need to think about that are different for them. The first thing is an adult has to be involved. While you're a minor, you cannot sign paperwork for any sort of financial account. They can't enter into a contract. Therefore, you need an adult, someone who is what they call the age of majority, to be able to do that. Now, that's determined by the state you live in, how the age of majority works. The vast majority of cases, though, it's 18, but you want to check in your state to make sure. There are some cases where it can be as long as 21. But check that, generally 18, but just want to keep an eye on that. Financial aid. So we think about college. When you apply for need-based financial aid for college, there's all these questions they ask you. And some of these choices that we're making about putting investments into a kid's name can have an effect on eligibility for what's called need-based financial aid. So financial aid based on your family finances, your ability to pay. It can have an effect. Now as we go through some options in a few minutes, we're going to talk about what that means specifically. But just know it's a possibility, and it's something to think about and consider. And this may not be a deciding factor for you, but it's something to think about and consider. Taxes. Some of the options we're going to talk about can affect your family taxes. Something to think about, be aware of, so you don't get a surprise. And by the way, some of those things are positive, some of them are not so positive. We'll talk about that. Last thing is gift rules. Because a lot of money invested for kids is derived from a gift from either you as a parent or someone else, it can run into a case where gifting rules apply. Well, what are gifting rules? Well, the IRS has rules about how much of a gift you can make to a kid or just practically anybody without incurring what's called gift tax. Something to keep an eye on. If you're going to make a larger gift, probably want to check the thresholds or speak with a professional first, just to make sure you're staying on the right side of those rules, and keep an eye on that. But something to be aware of. Okay. Now let's talk about some different paths we can go down. We're going to talk about 5 different options for investing on behalf of a child. Now I want to give you this caveat. These are not the only 5. There are many, many things you can do. But what I have put together here is the 5 that are most applicable to the broadest group of people that will cover a broad range of circumstances. There are other things out there that could be applicable to your particular needs or things you're going after. But the reason why I've chosen these 5 is they cover such a broad range of people in a broad range of situations. And that's what we're going to talk about. So let's start and talk about college. A lot of families have helping to pay for college as a priority for you. One of the ways you can do that is by putting money away for college. And a 529 plan, is what they're called, is a way to do that. Now they come in 2 different flavors. One type is a prepaid tuition plan. And what that is exactly what it sounds like, is you're putting money and paying tuition at today's rates, knowing that the price is probably going to go up by the time your son or daughter gets to college. That's one flavor. The other flavor is going to be an education savings plan. This is an option where you put money in for college, it gets invested, it grows, and then you get to take money out for college, including the growth. The second type here is where our focus is going to be today, but just know those 2 options are out there. So what does a 529 do? Well, it's for education, just like we said. Now, most people establish a 529 with the idea of paying for a 4-year college degree. And that is absolutely one thing they could be used for. but it is broader than that. That can be used for a 2-year college or associate's degree. Could be for private K through 12, so private school, private high school. Could even be used for a trade school. These have expanded in recent years to where they're applicable to a lot more situations and a lot more educational expenses. Now, who can establish this? Who can put money into a 529? Well, anybody. That's one of the great things about them. You as parents can put money into this. The other option is you can accept money into a 529 for your kid from practically anybody. It could be grandparents, friends, aunts and uncles, just about anybody. One popular thing I like to see that some folks do will set up a 529 and then encourage family to throw in some money at each birthday. Think about if every family member put money in for every birthday for 18 years, that can be pretty powerful. That'd be an option for that. That'd be an option. We think about who is eligible to establish 529. Again, this is very broad. It's pretty much as soon as a kid is born, you can start putting money into a 529. That's pretty much it. All the way up until when they're a young adult, you can do the same thing. Now, there's some rules in some cases about how long money has to stay in, but generally it's just about, it's pretty close up until college. So very broad availability on that. Very generous rules from that standpoint. From a tax standpoint, the impact here is pretty positive. 529s are great for taxes. When you are for certain states, you get a deduction on your state taxes. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. While money is growing in the account, you get a tax break there. You don't have to pay taxes year to year. And then when you take money out, as long as the money is used for what's called qualified educational expenses, which covers a lot of things, as long as it's used for a list of things the IRS says is okay, then you don't pay any taxes then. So think about things like tuition, fees, certain cases like technology, like a laptop. There's a broad range. You want to check and make sure of that. But the tax rules for these are very generous. Now, one question when we think about how much control do you get as a parent, or how much control does the adult get? It's a high degree of control with this. Even after the child turns 18, or is no longer a minor themselves, you continue to have control over this account, which for some people is very attractive to think about, where you're able to keep temptation away from that young adult. That control continues. That's attractive for a lot of people. Now, looking forward, thinking about those 529s, one question I get a lot is, what do I have to do to establish this? How much is it going to cost? We're going to talk about that a little more. But one of the things that's so great about 529s is they're so low minimum. And it depends on your state that you're in, because they're state specific. But there's some plans you only have to have $10 to start off with. $10, that's it. And some are $20. But most states, it's $10, $20 to start off with. Very easy to do, very accessible to be able to do that. Now, we think about, how does a 529 affect financial aid? And again, this is what's called need-based financial aid. Well, the good news is the impact is pretty small. The impact is very small. And you will be asked about if you have money at 529, you're going to get asked when you fill out the most popular financial aid form. It's called the FAFSA form. They're going to ask you a bunch of questions. One of those will be about money you have in 529. And a worry a lot of folks have is, well, if I save here, does that disqualify my kid from getting financial aid? It is one of many factors. And the good news is only a small fraction of what's in a 529 gets counted for those purposes. So for every $100, it's about $5 to $6 that gets counted for purposes of financial aid. It's a very small fraction. Compare that to if you have a savings account that's in a kid's name, significantly more of that's going to get counted compared to the 529. Very important to keep in mind. Now, we think about that tax benefit I was talking about. One thing that is unique with this is there's about 34 states that will give you a benefit when you put money into 529. Now, that's generally going to be states that have an income tax. They're typically going to give you a tax deduction. That can be valuable. We talked about that growth that happens while it's in the account. That's also valuable, and those withdrawals. So from a tax standpoint, very favorable, very valuable. Here's a little peek at those states that, as of this year, offer that benefit. And just keep in mind that benefit is state specific and it is different for virtually every state. So you want to check the rules, but just know if you are one of the highlighted states on here, it's worth looking into to see what that looks like. Now, how do you set up a 529? Well, when you think about the providers for 529s, they are state specific. Every state has their own plan, and you don't have to use your own state's plan, but most people are going to be best off using their state plan. I would consider that plan first and look at that one pretty strongly before branching out. That's important to look at. Most people are going to be on their specific state plan. That we talked about the minimums. Again, very low minimums compared to a lot of the stuff. Some are as low as $10, very accessible from that standpoint. Setup for these is typically online, but again, varies by state. There are some that are still on snail mail and still require you to do that. But the vast majority at this point, they're online or in an app. It's very easy. Let's talk about a different approach here. We're talking about UGMAs and UTMAs. So don't worry, I'm going to explain what those letters mean. Now, this is a way to save for a broad variety of things. So what does this mean? UGMA stands for Uniform Gifts to Minors Act. UTMA stands for Uniform Transfers to Minor Act. For our purposes today, they are extremely similar, and we're going to use the terms interchangeably. But essentially what this is a type of account where a child can use it for anything. Could use it for college, could use it for a car, a business, a trip to Las Vegas. Can't be used for anything. There are no restrictions on these funds once they're an adult. And where does money come from? It's going to come from a gift. It's going to be based on a gift, and that gift can come from anyone, parents, grandparents, anybody else. There's no restrictions on that. Now, who is eligible? Once a kid is born, they are eligible. Broad of eligibility on this. Now, tax impact. Our tax impact here is not as favorable as the last option we talked about. When you have money in a 529 UGMA that is invested, as there are things like capital gains, interest, dividends, that's going to go on your taxes year to year. That's going to get added on there. You have, in years where you have that income, you'll have to file that. And that's part of your tax return filing. That's going to be the case. When we look at this from a control standpoint, who controls the account? Well, while the child is a minor, whatever adult, could be a parent or somebody else, is going to have complete control. But after they reach that age of majority, that control ceases entirely, and this account belongs to the child. They can make whatever choices they want to make. Those can be good choices, bad choices, but it's going to be completely up to them. They will be the owner 100%, and there are no restrictions whatsoever on what those funds can be used for. When we think about the impact on financial aid for a UGMA, it's going to be a high impact. It's a substantial difference compared to the 529. We talked about much higher impact on financial aid. Doesn't mean they're necessarily disqualified for that, but it's going to count against them, for lack of a better word, much more than that college account we were talking about. When you're filling out financial aid paperwork, the FAFSA form, this is something you are going to be asked to report, and you will have to make note of, and they will take that into account as the college or any of the programs are going to evaluate your child for financial aid eligibility. We think about setting up this account. The providers for this are very, very broad. Pretty much every investment provider has an option for this type of account. So it's sky's the limit on that. You make a choice there. The minimum is going to depend on the provider. And a lot of times that is tied to the specific investment you're choosing. So as an example, if you decide you're going to open this account and there's a mutual fund that you want to invest in for your child, it's going to be based on that mutual fund's minimum, which could be anywhere from $50 up to a few $1,000s. Just depends on that. That's going to be tied toward that. So that's provider specific. So look into that. Usually this is going to be online. At this point, pretty much every provider will give you an online option, although it's not 100%. Let's talk about an ABLE account. Now, you may have heard of some of these other options. This is one a lot fewer people have heard about. And it's an acronym like the last one. ABLE stands for Achieving a Better Life Experience. And what this is, it's an account. It's much newer than the other ones we've talked about so far. It's only about a decade old, something Congress created. And it's another different thing about it is it can be established up to age 26, which is much different than some of these other options, which are focused on when you're a legal minor. Now, this has a very specific use case. It's for disability expenses specifically and exclusively. Now, the money that goes in there, that can come from anybody, but what it's used for, that is very limited. It's focused on disability expenses. Now, what's disabled? What does that mean? Well, there's a government definition that you have to conform to for your child's situation. So if you think you might qualify, I'd look into that and make sure they meet that definition. Now, from a tax standpoint, this does get preferred treatment. So that's the case for things like dividends and earnings. That makes a big case. Also get preferred tax treatment for withdrawals, just as long as a few requirements are met. Another key to keep in mind. When we think about this from a control standpoint, I want to stress the rules on this are complex, but usually an adult is going to be retaining control until the age of majority. But there are a lot of other circumstances that can occur with this. So that's outside of our scope for today. But I would encourage you, if you're thinking about this, to investigate that specifically, because there's some other rules that apply to that. We think about from a financial aid impact standpoint, an ABLE account is very favorable. There is no impact whatsoever to financial aid for this type of account. When you go through and fill out the FAFSA form for financial aid, you will be told, if you look in the instructions and read specifically, you'll be told to not report information on these accounts. They're meant to be excluded. When you set up these accounts, this is another one that is state specific and administered. Will go through your state of residence. The minimum, that depends on the particular state, but they tend to be low. And the opening process on this, these are newer. The process is a lot more varied. So you're gonna have to look at your state plan to see specifically, but just know there's some of these are more paperwork intensive. Let's talk about retirement. Now, retirement is not something we generally think about for children, teenagers, and the like. That's not something we look about. But we want them to be able to retire someday. And that's why this is something that's worth considering to think about. Now, before we jump into that specifically for a child, let's just quickly review what is a Roth IRA. What is that? Well, Roth IRA is a retirement account. And here's the way it works. You put in money to a Roth IRA. That money is going to get invested. It's going to grow. And while it's growing, you don't owe any taxes on that growth or interest, dividends, things like that. So that's a bonus. But far into the future, after that money has grown and your child is in retirement, they have met some IRS requirements, they get to take all that money out, including all the growth, completely tax-free. They don't owe any taxes, no matter how much it has grown, no matter how many times it is, God willing, doubled and grown in orders of magnitude. They get to take all that out tax-free. And again, there's requirements, but most people that are in retirement are able to to meet those fairly easily. That's how powerful this can be. And just to give you an example about two young ladies. We're going to take two examples here. They both say the exact same thing. They put $1,000 away. One does it at age 15, the other one at age 25. So both relatively young, but one's even younger. They start off with the same amount and they earn the exact same thing. And then we look at age 65. Well, our young lady that started at age 15 has about twice as much money. Just that 10-year head start made that big of an impact for her to where she doubled her money. That's incredible. She has that, and that there. The only difference between these two young ladies is time. That's how powerful that head start can be. And that's the impact that can have. I think about that impacting your child positively decades from now. That can be pretty powerful. Now, if you ask at the back of your mind, why doesn't everybody do this? Well, there's requirements to be able to qualify for a Roth IRA for a minor. And the biggest thing that is going to either qualify or disqualify your child is if they have what the IRS calls earned income. To be able to put money into a Roth IRA in a given year, your child has to have what's called earned income. Now, for most kids, that's going to be a teenager who has a part-time job where they're getting a tax form like a W-2. The vast majority of cases, there are some edge cases, but the vast majority of folks who qualify, that's going to be the use case. Now, by contrast, they could have some income that's considered unearned that wouldn't qualify. Even if they have that, they're not going to qualify. So things like that, or if you're paying them for chores around the house, if there's a gift, if they have earnings on investments, interest on a bank account, they've got a scholarship, none of those things are going to qualify them to be able to put money in a Roth IRA. Has to be what the IRS calls earned income. You can check the IRS website or talk with a professional to see, but just know majority of cases are going to be a teenager with a part-time job, getting a pay stub, tax form, all that good stuff. So looking forward to what this is used for. Well, it's retirement. Easy answer on this one. Now, who can establish this? Well, it's pretty much any kid that meets those requirements that we talked about. You got to meet the eligibility rules, but if they qualify for that, that is the case. Eligibility is going to go back to those rules we talked about. So that is the case. We think about the tax impact. We talked a little about that before, but it's extremely positive for a Roth IRA. And think about that tax-free income in retirement. That's extremely positive. The control in this one is going to be temporary. An adult will be on the account who will be making all the decisions up until the child reaches the age of majority. They're an legal adult, at which point they will take over. And it's up to them how they control the account from there. We look from a financial aid impact. Roth IRA has zero impact. There's no impact on that. When you fill out financial aid forms like the FAFSA, you'll be told to leave this one off completely. There is no impact. Another thing that is really great about this. When you think about from setting it from a standpoint, very wide availability on this. Almost all investment providers give an option for minors to set up a Roth IRA. Very wide choices on there. The minimum is going to be similar to the UGMAs we talked about. It's dependent on the provider and the specific investments, what that looks like. So anywhere from $50 up to a few $1,000, depends on the provider. And the way you're going to open this one, it does vary. Some providers will let you do this online, but the act of requiring the adult to be on there, some cases will make you have to do paperwork. So just check with the provider and see. But it's usually a fairly straightforward process. Our last option we're going to talk about is going to be a trust. So a lot of us hear things like a trust fund in movies and TVs and don't always know what that means. Well, it can be an option if you want to invest for a child. So what is a trust? What is that? Well, it's this legal entity. It's something that is created and it can do things like investing money or dispersing money. There's a whole host of things trusts could do, but that is something it could do. In this case, hold investments or grow investments or even disperse them. Now, trusts, because they're a legal entity, it's something you do have to work with an attorney on to set up. In some cases, you need to have an attorney working with you on an ongoing basis to administer the trust. That's something to think about. Much more complex than a lot of these other options we talked about. But the flexibility that you get in return for that complexity is pretty astounding with these. The flexibility you get when it comes to a trust. A trust will allow you to do all sorts of interesting things and put that together. What do I mean by that? Well, let me give you an example. Let's say you have a son and you're worried about their spending habits as they grow into adulthood. And say you want to put some limitations on there and say, well, we want to put some money aside for them, but we only want them to get a small portion of it when they're 25, a little bit more when they're 30, a little bit more when they're 35. You can do something like that with a trust. You can put in specific instructions like that. You could say, like, we only want this to go toward our grandchild. You could do that. Or we only want our daughter to get this money if she is married. There's all sorts of interesting things you can potentially do with this to administer those. There's also cases like if you have a special needs child, some of those can make sense. There's things called a special needs trust that can make sense for certain families. When we look from a financial aid impact standpoint, this is one where there's a high impact in most cases. Now, I want to put an asterisk beside that because it depends on the type of trust, what the specific impact is, but for most cases, it's going to be a high impact. And this is one you're going to have to report on financial aid forms. Now, when we think about what this is used for, it's pretty much, almost anything can be used for, depending on the trust agreement you write. Money can come from a variety of places. Eligibility is very broad with these. So you can do this for a minor child. It can also be done for an adult child. Lots of eligibility there. The tax impact, it's going to depend on the type of trust. There's usually not preferred tax treatment, but this is something where because of the complexity, you really need to get engaged with a professional on this. Now, we talk about that control, going back to that, high degree of control with these because it's so customizable and you can count for so many different situations, very high degree of control here. And when we think about providers, most investment providers will support a trust. Now, the minimums, that goes back to the investments and piece. Now, the opening, this is where I want to emphasize again. This is going to be very paperwork intensive. You absolutely have to go partner with an attorney on this to even discern if this is an option you should consider. But after you have made that decision, establishing it and maintaining it, you'll probably have to partner with an attorney there. And keep in mind the additional complexity and cost that goes along with that. So while this is an option for some cases, you need to make sure that it's the right option, given those other downsides we talked about. So looking at those 5 options, here's the way I would think about these. When we think about things that are going to be most applicable for most folks that are listening to today's presentation, things like the 529 for college savings or the UGMA for that flexible savings, those are going to be applicable to the most people listening to my voice right now. They're also going to be the least complex compared to some of these options. We think about what's applicable to much fewer families and more complex. That's going to include things like the ABLE account, the trust account. Now, for folks that need them, they are valuable tools and that may be the exact right thing, but just know that what you're seeing on the screen as you go toward the left is going to tend to be applicable to more folks than the things to the right. So keep that in mind. Now that we've gone through these options, well, what do you do? How do you take action on this? Well, one of the things I like to share with folks is this survey that was done a few years ago. They went and asked some older families to look back over the course of their lives and say, when was the most financially complex period that you experienced in your life? And about 4 out of 5 of the respondents on the survey said the time where they were raising children and having children was the most complex from a financial standpoint that they ever experienced. It includes their looking back of their whole life. And I absolutely agree with that. It's one of the reasons why I do what I do. And that's why I created Intrepid Eagle Finance. There's 3 things that we have as our core tenets for how we engage with folks that are important. So we work with folks where family is one of the most important things to them. That's very important. We partner with folks where faith is one of their most important values. And folks that have liberty as something that's important to them, they want their finances to have a sense of freedom with those and be able to do what they're called to do, not what their circumstances limit them to do. Now, there's 2 things we look at, we think are important that we bring to the table with folks. We have a big emphasis on having the right technology for folks. We want to have the best technology solutions available. We also want to have the best expertise. And that's why we bring expertise to the table that is focused around serving Christian families specifically and giving them the most valuable tools that we can find out there to help them be successful with their finances. And we think about looking at that. That's something I want to do to thank you today, to give you a bonus for sharing with us today. You're going to get the opportunity to use our family financial dashboard. And this is a tool we offer for our client families. We're going to give you an access to just a small amount of those tools to be able to look at, but you can do that and you'll be able to access that and sign up and use those tools in our app. That'll be an option for you. When we work with folks on financial planning, this is the framework we use for them that we think is so powerful. And folks start at different points on here, but we help folks work their way through here with a goal to get up to that height of that pyramid on there. And some folks are working on those foundational needs or setting up a safety net, their emergency fund, insurance, things like that. But our goal is to help folks move up here. When we think about this level 4 here, that's securing long-term victories, the subject matter we talked today definitely falls in there. And we think that's such an important thing to be able to get victories, not only for you and your spouse, but for your children, thinking about some of these decisions like setting money aside to be able to bless them, not just this year, but for potentially for years and years and years in advance, be able to do that. And then when we build on those victories, we get to go even higher than that on here and talk about blessing those future generations. We enjoy that work quite a bit. We find it very rewarding. The other thing we want to offer for you is the opportunity to get a free consultation with us. We want to be able to thank you for your time today, but also give you an opportunity to find out about what we do and get the opportunity to see how that applies to your family specifically. We believe every household's finances are unique and you deserve that special attention, but we want to be able to answer those questions for you, whether it's about a specific challenge you're facing right now or just generally. If you've ever wondered, like, well, could we benefit from getting some financial planning help? We'll be happy to talk with you about that and give you that option. Now, to take advantage of that opportunity and grab a time, you can either scan that QR code on the screen, or you can go to that address there, that iaf.llc/workshop. We'll ask you just a few pieces of information there about but to help us better get to know you, but you'll be able to pick out a time that's convenient for you and be able to have that meeting with us so we can answer your questions and help you get started and see if we're a good option for you. Great. So I'm going to pause for a minute. give you a chance to go to that address or scan the QR code real quick. And I'm going to start looking at the questions and try to answer some of those. Again, I encourage you to use that Q&A box. Pepper me with questions about things we talked about, or maybe things we didn't talk about. And we're going to bring those up in just a minute here. Okay, questions coming in. All right. All right, it's questions on the 529, the college savings plans. What happens if we put money away and my son does not go to college? Great question. This is a concern a lot of folks have. You don't lose the money. So that's the good news. The worst case scenario would be you still get to take the money out, but you have the possibility that you might have to pay some taxes and a penalty on that, but you definitely don't lose the money. That's the worst case scenario. The other option that a lot of families take advantage of is you can switch 529 to a different child. And that can be an interesting way to go with that. So to play that out, let's say you have 2 kids, you save for the oldest child, they grow up, decide college is not for them. You can switch it to their sibling. And it's just like it was theirs all along. And the definition of family on this, you want to check the rules if you're thinking about it, but the definition's pretty broad. For example, that could go like first cousins are included as well. Lots of good options with that. Okay. Let's look at some other options here. Let's see. Do you help with investments for children? Yes. Yep. This is absolutely something we help with for children. Okay. What else here? We got a question here about 401k for a child. That's possible. It's extremely rare because a 401k is tied to work. Typically, it's going to be a job where that applies. You can get part-time jobs where you qualify for a 401k, but typically minors are excluded from that, even if they're employed at the company. So it's really not applicable. If it's an option, sure, look into it, check it out. But I'll tell you, it's exceedingly rare that that's an option. Okay. Let's see, what kinds of investments can you have in the UGMA? It's virtually anything. Really, there's just about any type of investment you can have in the UGMA. Now, for most people, what that ends up being is things like mutual funds, exchange traded funds, stocks, things like that. But it's even broader than that. So very, very broad there. Okay. All right. See somebody asking about making a child a beneficiary on their own accounts. Yep, you can absolutely do that. So that if you can make a kid a beneficiary, say for your own account, then they inherit that. If they're still a minor at that time, then whoever typically as a guardian would step in there to be on the account. But yes, that is the case. That is an option you can do. Okay. All right, 1 or 2 more here. Question on somebody asking, what is a Coverdell account? So a Coverdell is a different type of college savings account. Coverdells actually predate 529 plans. They have fallen out of favor just because 529s have become a lot more broad with what you can use. I would tell you the vast majority of people find that a 529 is going to be the more applicable option. Coverdell's are still out there, but the availability is all but collapsed. A lot of providers have just stopped offering them, and the options have become much more limited. But they're out there. It's something you look in. You can use it for a lot of things like college. So that'd be another option. Okay. All right. All right. We're going to cut it off there. Questions have started to slow down. So if I missed yours, I apologize, but we'll leave this up here one more time. Encourage you, take advantage of that free time we're offering. We'd be happy to get to talk to you and see what we can do to help you and help you decide what your path is and see what we might be able to do to help with that. But I want to thank you for joining us today, and I hope you have a great day. I hope your day is blessed, and I hope your family is blessed. Bye-bye.